Welcome to Idlewild Cottage, a quiet place where kindred spirits can linger together over a cup of tea, savoring all things lovely and cozy. My name is Juliana, and I'm delighted to have you. Each episode here at the cottage will center around a theme. That theme will be celebrated in a number of ways, through literature, art, nature, and even some favorite movie scenes. We'll cherish the sweet and simple things of life. So make yourself at home, and I'll put the kettle on. If you were with us last week, you'll recall that we started our two-part series, Where Time Stands Still, with a number of moments in which our literary friends are swept into the beauty of nature. We joined Heidi on mountaintops, Ratty and Mole on an island, Laura and Mary on the prairie, and more. This week, we'll continue with this delight, shifting our focus to majestic waters. From the humble stream to the powerful sea, we'll invite time to once more stand still as we step into the pages of several favorite stories. As we did last week, let's begin with Laura Ingalls, this time in her book, By the Shores of Silver Lake. Though a full, busy day awaits her, Laura pauses in her morning chores to admire the beauty of her family's new surroundings. The sun had not yet risen when Laura let down the pail into the shallow well by Silver Lake. Beyond the lake's eastern shore, the pale sky was bordered with bands of crimson and gold. Night was still shadowy in the northwest, but Silver Lake lay like a sheet of silver in its setting of tall wild grasses. Ducks quacked among the grasses, screaming gulls flew over the lake. A wild goose rose from the water with a ringing call. Shafts of golden light shot higher and higher in the eastern sky until their brightness touched the water and was reflected there. Laura breathed a long breath. Then she pulled up the pail of water and hurried back toward the shanty. Laura has a deep sense of both peace and responsibility and hurries back to her work. Yet for Jody Baxter of Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings' book, The Yearling, hurry is simply not in his vocabulary. As we did a few episodes back, we'll again join Jody as his worries and cares are gently swept downstream on the rippling waters. A spring as clear as well water bubbled up from nowhere in the sand. It was as though the banks cupped green leafy hands to hold it. Jody liked to think that no one came here but himself and the wild animals and the thirsty birds. The dusky glen laid cool hands on him. He rolled up the hems of his blue denim breeches and stepped with bare, dirty feet into the shallow spring. The water was so cold that for a moment it burned his skin. Then it made a rippling sound, flowing past his pipe-stem legs, and was entirely delicious. A breeze parted the canopied limbs overhead. The sun dropped through and lay on his head and shoulders. Streams hold irresistible charm not only for boys and girls, but for grown-ups too. Accordingly, I'd like us to imagine ourselves perched along the banks of the little brook that merrily skips and laughs its way through the far end of the Idlewild Cottage acreage. A moss-covered log in this old-growth forest makes an ideal seat for us as we open a picnic basket and nibble away on dainty sandwiches while stepping into the pages of The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. In this scene, we have momentarily shifted away from the main plot to discover how Colin's father is awakening to new joys as he travels through a lush Austrian valley. At last he had felt tired and had thrown himself down to rest on a carpet of moss by a stream. It was a clear little stream which ran quite merrily along on its narrow way through the luscious damp greenness. Sometimes it made a sound rather like very low laughter as it bubbled over and round stones. It seemed like a thing alive, and yet its tiny voice made the stillness seem deeper. The valley was very, very still. As he sat gazing into the clear running of the water, Archibald Craven gradually felt his mind and body both grow quiet as the valley itself. He sat and gazed at the sunlit water, and his eyes began to see things growing at its edge. There was one lovely mass of blue forget-me-nots growing so close to the stream that its leaves were wet, and at these he found himself looking as he remembered he had looked at such things years ago. He was actually thinking tenderly how lovely it was and what wonders of blue its hundreds of little blossoms were. He did not know that just that simple thought was slowly filling his mind, filling and filling it until other things were softly pushed aside. It was as if a sweet, clear spring had begun to rise in a stagnant pool and had risen and risen until at last it swept the dark water away. While Mr. Craven is discovering who he is, Stephen Waterman is completely at home along the shore, even as his name suggests. In the opening pages of Rose o' the River by Kate Douglas Wiggin, we are introduced to our hero. It was not long after sunrise, and Stephen Waterman, fresh from his dip in the river, had scrambled up the hillside from the hut in the alder bushes. The Waterman house was hardly a stone's throw from the water, and there was a clear, deep swimming hole in the willow cover. Stephen was a child of the river, born, reared, schooled on its very brink, never happy unless he were on it or in it or beside it or at least within sight or sound of it. The immensity of the sea had always silenced and overawed him, left him cold in feeling. The river wooed him, caressed him, won his heart. It was just big enough to love. It was full of charms and change, of varying moods and sudden surprises. Its voice stole in upon his ear with a melody far sweeter and more subtle than the boom of the ocean. In her book, The Mill on the Floss, George Eliot, the pen name of Mary Ann Evans, chronicles the poignant scenes of English life along the river Floss. This is a profound work, not one I'd class among the lovely and cozy as I typically share, but thought-provoking and powerful. Our narrator reflects. I must linger a minute or two here on the bridge and look at it. The stream is brimful now and lies high in this little withy plantation and half drowns the grassy fringe of the croft in front of the house. As I look at the full stream, the vivid grass, the delicate bright green powder softening the outline of the great trunks and branches that gleam from under the bare purple boughs, I am in love with moistness and envy the white ducks that are dipping their heads far into the water. The rush of water and the booming of the mill bring a dreamy deftness which seems to heighten the peacefulness of the scene. They are like a great curtain of sound shutting one out from the world beyond. Our kindred spirit, Anne Shirley, now Anne Blythe, finds a moment of solitude and chooses to tuck herself away from the world beyond as she heads toward the shore one moonlit evening. From Anne's House of Dreams, we read, Anne loved the gentle, misty harbor shore and the silvery, wind-haunted sand shore, but best of all, she loved the rock shore, with its cliffs and caves and piles of surf-worn boulders, and its coves where pebbles glittered under pools, and it was to this shore she hied herself tonight. The shore lay clean washed after the storm of wind and rain. Not a wind stirred, but there was still a fine surf on, dashing on sand and rock in a splendid white turmoil, the only restless thing in the great pervading stillness and peace. "Oh, this is a moment worth living through weeks of storm and stress for," Anne exclaimed, delightedly sending her far gaze across the tossing waters from the top of the cliff where she stood. Presently, she scrambled down the steep path to the little cove below. "I'm going to dance and sing," she said. "There's no one here to see me. The seagulls won't carry tales of the matter. I may be as crazy as I like." She caught up her skirt and whirled round and round, laughing like a child along the hard strip of sand just out of reach of the waves that almost lapped her feet with their spent foam. Let's now join another Anne. Anne Morrow Lindbergh's thought-provoking book of essays, Gift from the Sea, invites us to sit in quiet solitude, learning lessons of peace and contentment as waves follow one after another on a quiet vacation. For a full day and 2 nights I have been alone. I lay on the beach under the stars at night alone. I take my breakfast alone. Alone I watched the gulls dip and wheel and dive for the scraps I threw them. A late picnic lunch alone on the beach, and it seemed to me, separated from my own species, that I was nearer to others, the shy willet, nesting in the ragged tidewash behind me, the sandpiper running in little unfrightened steps down the shining beach rim ahead of me, the slowly flapping pelicans over my head coasting downwind. I felt a kind of impersonal kinship with them and a joy in that kinship. Beauty of earth and sea and air meant more to me. I was in harmony with it, melted into the universe, lost in it as one is lost in a canticle of praise swelling from a cathedral. Lindbergh writes of actual solitude, while Elizabeth von Arnim celebrates the quiet solitude one can experience even in pleasant company. Such is the awakening of our heroines in The Enchanted April as they melt into their Mediterranean holiday. They left the path and clambered down the olive terraces, down and down to where the warm, sleepy sea heaved gently among the rocks. There a pine tree grew close to the water, and they sat under it. The ripples of the sea made little gurgling noises at their feet. The hot smell from the pine needles and from the cushions of wild thyme that padded the spaces between the rocks, and sometimes a smell of pure honey from a clump of warm irises puffed across their faces. Very soon Mrs. Wilkins took her shoes and stockings off and let her feet hang in the water. After watching her a minute, Mrs. Arbuthnot did the same. Their happiness was then complete. They left off talking. They were just cups of acceptance. This imagery of humans as vessels of joyful acceptance brings me to our final passage. Hind's Feet on High Places is an allegory written by Hannah Hurnard in 1955. We follow the journey of the unlikely heroine, Much Afraid, as she travels with the shepherd from the degrading valley of humiliation to the majestic high places. For our closing today, let's imagine ourselves as sweet Much Afraid, keeping close to our shepherd guide while approaching the mighty waterfall. At the foot of the cliffs, they found themselves standing in cool shadows with a light spray sometimes splashing their faces. There stood Much Afraid, a tiny figure at the foot of the mighty cliffs, looking up at the great, never-ending rush of waters as they cast themselves down from the high places. She thought that never before had she seen anything so majestic or so terrifyingly lovely. The height of the rocky lip over which the waters cast themselves to be dashed to pieces on the rocks below almost terrified her. At the foot of the waterfall, the thunderous voice of the waters seemed almost deafening, but it seemed also to be filled with meaning, grand and awesome, beautiful beyond expression. Kindred spirits, as we step into this month of May, Would our eyes and ears be in tune to the grand and awesome expressions of beauty around us? Would the tiniest blossom along the stream, the foam fringing the seashore, or the joyful leap of the waterfall make us feel close to the shepherd who guides us faithfully by the hand? Thank you for joining me today, dear ones. Please come again soon to Idlewild Cottage.